Today, the budget crawler gets a budget motor mount lift. So I've been on the fence about doing a motor mount lift on this Jeep for a while, and I finally came to the decision to just go ahead and do it. Now when it comes to motor mount lifts, you've got two basic types. You've got the budget type, which you see in front of us here, where basically you take the stock motor mount from the frame, shove this chunk of aluminum underneath it, and it spaces up the motor mount and therefore lifts the motor. And the other type is a full replacement motor mount, where we take out the stock one and just put in a taller aftermarket motor mount. Now on the 4-cylinder engines like I've got right here, I highly recommend the budget motor mount because these 4 cylinders are terribly unbalanced engines, and the stock motor mounts do a very good job at isolating the vibrations from the engine to the chassis, and most aftermarket motor mounts are going to transfer the vibrations much worse. Now on the 6-cylinder engines, the 4.0s, I would recommend getting an actual replacement motor mount because those engines are balanced a little better than the 4 cylinders. So what do we have in front of us here? Well, we've got 2 chunks of 1-inch thick aluminum and all the hardware needed to install this thing. I bought this kit off of eBay for like 30 bucks. It's basically exactly the same as the Rough Country kit, just half the price. So if you want one of these, go ahead over to eBay and pick one up because that's an incredible price. I don't even think I could build this for that price. I was thinking about building one of these myself until I found the $30 one on eBay, and I said, no way I'm wasting time building one. Now, why would you want a motor mount lift? Well, for most people, the reason is going to be to correct driveline angles, because when you lift your Jeep, your transfer case gets raised up with your Jeep, but your axle stays in the same place, which means that your rear drive shaft angle can get a little bit extreme. So by lifting the motor, it'll in turn pivot the whole drivetrain so that where the rear drive shaft attaches to the transfer case is a little more in line with the drive shaft and helps to correct some of the drive shaft angles in the rear end. And that is not why I'm installing this, because I have a super short slip yoke eliminator, and that eliminates that need for me. So the reasons that I'm installing this, I have pretty much 3 reasons. Number 1 is to gain a little more clearance between the oil pan and the ground. Number 2 is to try to gain a little more clearance between the shifter and the dash without having to bend this thing. And number 3 is to lift up the front of the engine to try to align the fan clutch back up with the center of the radiator again, because we put that 1¼ inch body lift on here, and at the same time I put this electric fan in. However, I want to take this electric fan and put it on my V8 swapped Wrangler, which means this is going to have to go back to mechanical fan. So we're going to need to lift the engine up with the motor mount lift in order to get the fan centered in the factory shroud again. Now on each of these motor mounts, and this one being the passenger side, we've got a bolt and then a nut on the bottom side. So we'll have to take out that bolt, take out the nut, then we can go ahead and lift the engine up. Hopefully these things will just slide right in. Put the new hardware on and we'll be good to go. And that would be the ideal case. First thing I'm going to do before I do that though is I'm going to disconnect the downpipe for the exhaust from the exhaust manifold. That way as we're moving this around, the exhaust won't be twisted and moved around with it. Because I do have a custom exhaust set up and it's not really mounted to the drivetrain like it normally is on a stock Jeep. With all the factory hardware removed, we're going to go ahead and jack up the front of the engine, and hopefully I'll be able to get the new stuff slid in there without removing the motor mounts themselves. If it ends up being a challenge, I'm going to have to pull the motor mounts, but I'm going to try to avoid that for now. Unfortunately, I did end up having to remove these because there's just a little bit too much rust underneath the base of them, and I wanted to clean that up before putting the aluminum block in there. Otherwise, I don't think the aluminum would have sat totally flat. Now, this is what one of these things looks like removed, and I did go ahead and clean it up and paint it. So that's why it looks nice and shiny black right now. Now, before we put it back in place, I'm going to set it up with the new hardware, and we'll keep moving forward. So we got the little posts onto both motor mounts, and I was getting ready to throw the new aluminum blocks in there, and it turns out, at least on my engine, this corner of this block ends up hitting up against the steel part of the motor mount on the engine block. So I just zipped that off with the cutoff wheel, And I touched up the clear coat because I painted these with a clear coat a couple weeks ago in preparation for doing this. Alright, we got both blocks in here, got the bolts all lined up, engines dropped back down, and weights on the motor mounts again. This is really a two-man job. I was back and forth underneath the Jeep, back to the jack, over to the Jeep, back to the jack, trying to line everything up, and somehow I managed to make do with half a man. So now we're just going to go ahead and snug these bolts up. You can see I had to take out the alternator to get to one of the bolts on this side because the bolt came out this way. If the bolt came out backwards towards the back of the Jeep, wouldn't have had to pop off the alternator, but it was just two bolts to take that off, and had to take off the serpentine belt, so probably 2 minutes total to pull that thing off. But we'll have to get that back on, and then we'll pretty much be done with this project. So let's just skip to the end here. Alright, you can see we've got everything buttoned up and put back together. The engine is sitting a little more nicely in the engine bay now, a little higher. We've got that extra ground clearance under the oil pan. The shifter is no longer as close as it was to the dash, and if I choose to, I can put a mechanical fan back in here again. Now, the aluminum does contrast the black and somewhat greasy engine bay. Maybe I should have used a black paint to kind of blend in a little better and keep it from looking as dirty once it does get covered in oil and power steering fluid and every other fluid that leaks on this Jeep. But my go-to coating for aluminum usually is matte clear coat, or sometimes I'll mix it up a little and I'll sand the aluminum to give it a dulled finish and put a regular clear coat on it. But that's just my preference. I do like the look of aluminum, and I do like the contrast that it adds to, especially a black Jeep like this. I think it's a pretty sharp look, and I'm probably just going to keep doing that with the aluminum stuff I put on here, just like I did with the body lift. And this is pretty much the best angle that I could get to shoot this at, and well, I think it kind of shows you what we accomplished here. And this was definitely the most budget motor mount lift that you can get off the shelf. I'm very glad that I went this route buying the pre-made kit instead of making one myself like I had originally planned on doing, because the thing was only 30 bucks. I mean, I don't know how the guy that's making this is making any money off of it. I'm assuming he's making this stuff in-house, because that $30 included shipping, so I figured maybe $10 for shipping. I bought this on eBay, so it was eBay fees he's going to have to pay. I mean, he's probably seeing a $20 bill minus the cost of materials. I can't imagine he's spending less than $10 on materials, so I mean, this is just a super deal. If you're looking for a budget motor mount lift, definitely get over to eBay and check these things out. It comes with all the hardware, which I wasn't quite sure about at first because the picture on the eBay ad doesn't show all the hardware that it came with, but it did end up coming with everything that we needed. So super good deal, 30 bucks there, $29.99 technically. And then today we used a little bit of clear coat on the aluminum pieces, and I used some paint on the motor mounts themselves. So I'm just going to throw a total of $3 in there, and that makes our day nice and cheap at right about 33 bucks. So as usual, thanks for watching, and follow along for more to come.